that how can a speaker make his or her utterance understood? And another question reads, how can a writer make his or her written work understood? You might be asking yourself a question of, why do I have to have this second question while our topic is to do with speaking? I made this question purposely so that at the end of the day we should be able now to know that when we are writing, what are the features that you have to look at? Why do you have to use them? But today, we are specifically going to look at how can a person make himself or herself understood before others when he or she speaks. So the features we are going to look at are: 1, we look at the pause. We look at length. We'll talk about stress. And finally, there will be intonation. So, why should a person pause? How can a person discriminate sounds? Or how can a person discriminate sounds when he or she speaks? Why stress fall? And how important is it that a person has to use intonation? So as I said before, that when we are speaking, we have to observe some of the features that at the end of the day, they are going to make our utterances being understood. Remember, we are using language for communication. And if what you communicate is not understood, that means that would be meaningless for us to use language to communicate. But now, using language, we cannot just use it the way we want. There are some guidelines that a person has to observe, just like rules. That when we are speaking, we are using sounds. And contrarily, when we are writing, we are using letters. It is very easy for a person to communicate, especially the language that he or she has been grown up with. I'm talking about the native language. Because the rules and or other principles, they are inborn. That you automatically find yourself, you know them. Think of yourself as you speak Kiswahili as your native language. You can use the language to communicate whatever feelings that you have. But here today, we are looking at English language. The language that we happen to come across it when we are in schools. And in this case, there are some interferences of our first language in speaking this language. And that is the reason I bring this forward to you today, to see how best a person can use these prosodic features to make his or her utterances being understood. Just before we go to them, you know, as I said before, when we speak, we are using sounds. We produce sounds. Sometimes we learn them and we practice them. But sounds by themselves, they are meaningless. They only become meaningful when they are put together. Now, when you put them together, there is a way on how you can pronounce that word. English words are different from Kiswahili ones because the way a word is pronounced sometimes it's not the way how it is written. So this inconsistency or this mismatch between the pronunciation and the spelling sometimes somehow make most people fail to pronounce English words. So the moment you fail to pronounce the word as it is supposed to, it is very likely that whatever you're going to say might not be understood to the second party. And especially if you're talking to a native speaker of this language. Think of this word, for instance. Dear students, how do you pronounce this word? As a Swahili speaker, and probably many of us, we think the word is pronounced as onion. That you just pronounce the way as it reads. But if you are talking to a native speaker of English, when you talk about onion, you won't understand one another. He'd keep on asking himself or herself, what is it that you're trying to communicate? So, starting from the proper pronunciation, its proper pronunciation, how do you pronounce that? It is pronounced as an onion. Onion. Can you say onion? So that is the way how you pronounce this word. So as I said before, when you are to speak or when you are to communicate using English, you should first of all using proper pronunciation. If you miss that, you'll definitely be speaking a language of your own and not English as it is supposed to. After you have mastered the way the sounds are supposed to be pronounced, this is when now you're going to see how can you make those words meaningful. When we speak, when we communicate, we don't communicate using individual words. We are using words in a string, connected words. Now, how can we make these prosodic features applicable in our speaking? You have pause. What's a pause? And how do you pause? A pause is a short break. It's a short break when you are speaking. We cannot just speak continuously as we connect these words. That it is believed after every word there should be a short break. That when you make those short breaks, when you are speaking, you are in fact trying to make the other person being able to follow and at the end of the day understands what you communicate. Think about, for instance, Look at this sentence. This sentence contains words, as you can see the way it is written. When I speak these words, after every word, as I write, you can see there is a space in between. So similarly, when we are speaking, you cannot speak by joining these words. You make a short break at least after every word, as I said, so that you can give space to your friend who is listening to be able to follow and finally understand what you communicate. Imagine the same sentence or the same words, you find somebody has written them like this. No spaces in between the words. If you are told to read, how fast can you read it? Of course, it will take you some time to make the demarcation between the words, so that at the end of the day, you come across with this text and therefore you'll be able to understand. So that's why I say, even when we speak, we need not to speak very fast to an extent that we don't give ourselves enough time to understand and being able to follow what is being communicated. This is the feature that can make a person understand what is being communicated. Yeah, as we say about pause, that when you look at the way how these words have been connected without some spaces in between, that it makes a person difficult for him or her to follow what it has been written. But as I said, it will take some time for this person to start making some demarcation between these words, and as a result, he or she might have a sentence that reads like, Juma is going to school. So this becomes easy when you have words with the spaces in between. And in most cases, when we read or when you speak, we speak in this way when we are making formal presentation, that we speak distinctive words so that a person can easily follow and understand. But there are times when people enter into a conversation that when they are speaking, they cannot speak as they use words individually. That there are some features that they have to accompany whatever they say, and in that case, you find the words are connected. Let us now examine another example sentence. Now this sentence reads as, the answer is simple if you read the words individually. But for the smooth transition and for the conversation to sound natural, if at all, this is one of the utterances that a speaker could make, and especially a native speaker. We find there are times when there are some sounds which we have to insert in between some words, and there are some sounds which they have to sound differently from the way they look like in the normal spelling. And even sometimes we are forced to delete some of the other sounds or some of the other letters, especially if they are to be written. But here we are talking about speaking. When you are listening to a native speaker, you have to be very careful to observe these other sounds which are either added or deleted, or sometimes a certain sound can behave in a way that another sound behaves. So in a sentence like this, if a person has to speak in a smooth transition and for a sound or for the sentence to sound naturally, You'll hear a person say something like, now look at the connection between the two words. That somewhere in between the first word and the second word, there is the insertion of this sound yeah. And altogether now, the two words sounds as the answer. The answer. Now, if we are to add, or if we are to connect with the followed other word, now since this word ends with a vowel sound, and the followed word starts with a vowel sound, and as long as this word ends with an R letter as its spelling, then this R, it has to sound, and which in this case, in a normal speaking, will pronounce or will speak this as the answer is. So the answer is becomes a smooth and a natural way on how this expression or this utterance has to be heard. So what we have seen here is that there is an insertion of this yeah in between, and also there is this R. At this point, I would name this as a linking R. And we call it a linking simply because it is there already in our original and or in our sentence. That is a second example of where we see there are some sounds which have been inserted, and or there are some sounds which they act as a linking sound, and we are speaking. Again, we can also examine, for instance, another expression or utterance that reads like, look at this. Or if you read these individual words, the sentence will read as, if you are happy and you know it. Now, as I said, when we are speaking, and or when you come across with this as a verse in a poem, how are you going to sing it? How these words are going to be connected in a smooth transition and or in a natural way on how this expression can be heard. You'll find a person speak it as, now look at the three words, they would read as ifya. Ifya. So this if, you take the of it, and this you will only be represented by the ya, and that a will be represented by the shwa. So ifya. So if you're happy, and so now look at how does this word and sounds. This word will of course sound as an, which at the beginning it was supposed to have those other sounds. Now because of this natural and or smooth transition of what I said before, we simply leave the sound n as a connector. And you finally remain with these other expressions. Now, I want you to be very careful looking at the last two words. No. This ends with a vowel sound. And this one begins with also a vowel sound. Now, when we want to connect this, we should not be tempted of thinking about the intrusive R. Now, since because the last sound in this diphthong is U. So whenever we come across with U as a last sound in a diphthong, that tends to have a glide. That tends to form or to insert a glide in between the two. So at this point, we will instead insert this glide w, and altogether the two words will read as know it. So if I have to read the whole expression, it could read like, if you're happy and you know it. So in this case, I just want to draw your attention by, you might hear a person speaking a word which you might have never heard it before anywhere. And when you go to a dictionary, you might not even come across it, simply because there are some sounds which have been inserted in between. Now, if you are not aware with all those, that is the time when a person will find difficulties to make follow of what is going to be spoken or what is spoken. This is another example of how we can insert some sounds. Now, look at this expression which you might have either heard and or you might have spoken it as well. The two words, moreover. Now, as we speak, or as you hear one speaks, you can't find him or her say moreover, but instead you'll find him or her speaking something like moreover. So moreover, at this point, you have inserted the R, which differently from the previous and that we have seen, this one is what we call intrusive R. Intrusive R. So the R wasn't there, but we have inserted just because of to meet the purpose of how the two words can be connected. So we have seen there's intrusive R, we have seen there's a linking R. But again, we have seen there's the insertion of this ya and wa. All this, they're trying to make our speech sounds naturally. But there's one more other which I would also want to draw your attention. It's like there are times, look at this for instance. The two words read separately as 10 men. Now in speaking, sounds, they are spoken by different organs of speech. So there are sounds which when they are spoken, the organs of speech that are used, they are closer by, such that when one sound is spoken, it tends to have a quality of the other sound. And in that case, in speaking, we find the behavior that the followed sound has, it is more or less the same behavior that the previous sound has. So it's like one sound trying to take the qualities of a previous sound. So in speaking, we call this assimilation. So the traits which are in one sound are being taken to the other sound. Look at this one. We have this sound as 10. This one as men. Now, as you can see, the last sound and the first sound, this one is and this one is So you find the alveolar is very closer to the bilabial, and apart from it, they are both nasal. So when we are to speak the two words in connection, then you'll find someone would speak something like this. And in that case, you'll find this one is not heard. And as a result, you'll find someone say something like temen. Temen. So this is what we call assimilation. My dear students, and so this is what I would altogether call them as some features which we normally use and some native speakers use when they are speaking. So if you want to be a good listener in that matter, we have to practice this and see how best we can identify and be able to follow what it is communicated. A pause sometimes help to make expressions being understood differently. You might find there are some words which when you pronounce them without making a pause in a proper area, you find, or you may find yourself talking about something which is different from the one that you have intended to. Think about these two words. What if you find a person decided not to observe a pause in between the two words, and instead he or she connects them? So instead of you talking about forest, you talk about forest. Now it is only a pause that can make the two expressions different in terms of meaning. Think about these two expressions as well. You talk about ice cream and you talk about I scream. Now, apart from pause, in English, you have this word length. Length, you're talking about the duration that a person spends to produce something. You can use a long time or you can use a short time. That will depend on the nature of the sounds that you are to pronounce. There are some sounds in English which they seem to be a bit similar, but you can discriminate them by using length. Think about these words. How can you pronounce these two words? The first one, you pronounce it as ship. But the second one, you pronounce it as sheep. Now look at what you have in between the two consonants. The same sound E. How do you discriminate them? How do you discriminate them? This one is ship and that one is sheep. Now, when you are communicating, if you fail to observe the time that you are going to spend in producing these sounds, you'll find the two words sound the same. And so a person who is listening, provided he or she, maybe if she or he is a native speaker of this language, then again he would be putting some question marks, asking himself, what is it that you are trying to communicate? Another example you can have is like this word, pot. And look at this other word. How do you differentiate the two when you are speaking? You can only differentiate the two by observing the time you spend in producing these sounds. This one, you'll talk about pot, while this one, you'll talk about pot. So since in Kiswahili, we don't have this sound discrimination, then as we are now speaking English, in order for us to make what we are trying to communicate meaningful, then a person has to observe this. There are a lot of words which it is only the length of the vowel sounds that can differentiate the meaning of the two. When you write, of course, there's no problem because they differ in the spelling. But when you speak, you find almost all sounds are the same. But the only thing that makes them different, it is the time you spend in producing them. Think of any other two words which seem to be similar in the way we pronounce, but they are only differentiated by the time you spend in producing the sounds. Can you think of one? Okay, let me help you, give you one more. How do you pronounce this? This is pull, but the other one is pool. And you can think of many more other words now. But what I'm trying to say here is, why do we have to observe this? Not only to make sound discrimination, but they are meaningful things, they are meaningful expression that you have to observe in order to make the words understood. Let us also examine these two other words, bid and beat. The two words, as you pronounce, you'd find they have similar nuclear. The E, the long one. But when you speak the two words in a smooth transition and O, when we speak the two words, you find one of them is spoken with extra length. And this extra length is caused by the context in which the sound appears. The sound I'm speaking here is this one, bid, and this is bid. Now, when the two words sounds, someone might be tempted to say they are more or less the same. But the truth is, this one, it has an extra length. And this extra length is caused by the context. What kind of context? It is said that when a vowel is followed by a voiced coda, and or when a vowel is followed by a voiced sound, that vowel will tend to be lengthened. So it is at this point when we say this one has been lengthened simply because of this voiced. Contrary to when the same sound is followed by a voiceless coda. And in this case, we are talking about what is called contextual length. That the vowel has been made longer simply because of the environment in which it occurs. In comparison with some other vowels which might be also long, but because of the environment or because of the context in which they appear, they find themselves being heard not the same as those which are ended by, which ends with a voiced sound. Let's now look at how important stress is in our communication. What is stress? It is just an emphasis that a person has to apply when speaking. It is the extra energy that you apply when you pronounce a syllable. Now, when you use extra energy, or when you say you put an emphasis in producing a syllable, that means that syllable will be heard louder than the other. Sometimes it can be heard longer than the other. And in that case, that syllable will be referred as a stressed syllable. Look at this word. Look at this word. How do you pronounce this? We pronounce this as referee. It is referee. So the last syllable, it is the one that will be heard louder comparing to the other. And so we call this as a stressed syllable. But when this is a stressed syllable, then the other one will be referred as unstressed syllable. So a stressed syllable is the one which is heard louder when you are speaking. We do not speak these words constantly. There has to be the up and down as we speak. Sometimes it is the one that creates rhythm in our speaking, that can make what you say attractive. It's like you're making some beats. Think of another word like this one. How do you pronounce this? This one, it is pronounced by having put a stress somewhere there. We call it ambiguity. Ambiguity. So what I'm trying to say here is stress as a meaningful feature, it is there in all languages. But the stress pattern is not the same in all languages. In Kiswahili, for instance, we have stress as well. But the stress pattern in Kiswahili is different from that we have in English. Kiswahili, we put stress on the last syllable but one. We call it penultimate syllable. The last syllable but one. Or the second syllable from the last. For instance, maybe I should give you one example. This is the last syllable and this is the second from the last, and so we put our stress on that syllable. You say it is anacheza. Anacheza. Or think about a stress there. That becomes chakula. You can't put a stress on the first syllable. You can't say chakula. No, we don't speak in that way. And in case you cannot even say chakula. No. That a stress has to be on the second syllable from the last. But this is quite different from English. That a stress position varies from one word to another. For example, we have this word referee, as we said, maybe. We said you put a stress on the last syllable. But when you come off across a word like this one again, where do you put a stress? The word reads establish. So you put a stress on the second syllable. A word like this, for instance, if you want to put a stress there, becomes export. So you can see the stress positioning differ from one word to another. So in this case, one has to practice. One has to know the exact place where a stress has to be put. We don't just put a stress anywhere we like. And if we do that, we are going to distort the meaning of what we are going to communicate. So as I said earlier, it is easier for a native speaker of English language to have mastered all these. We as the speaker who speak this language as a second language, we are not used with these stresses. And that is why it is important for us to practice them. You find the listener all the time keeps on asking you, pardon, pardon, pardon? No, you start asking yourself, is it that you don't know English language? You know it, you know the words, but how do you pronounce them? That is the thing that could make the differences. This stress, it has several functions. Why do we have these stresses? As I said, stress in English word varies. So at time, a stress
Kipindi cha Darasa Online kimeletwa kwenu na Chuo Kikuu cha Sauti Mbeya.
Tabasamu limerudi, tabasamu lako naliimbe, tabasamu lako lionekane, na uzuri wako usambae. Tabasamu langu linasambaa.